But today we are going to discuss, elaborate more. It's a big issue that just now we discussed with the panelists during the break in another room. We discussed, is it right to put art and culture as the fourth pillar of sustainability? Some people no, some people yes, some people I don't know. Today is the right time to discuss about this topic on an art and culture as the fourth pillar of sustainability, because culture and creativities are one of the great global success stories for past more than 30 years. It's related to interface between creativity, economy, technology, and real tangible reaction. We have, if we look at the detail of SDG, actually the culture is part of the SDG. If people look at the book of SDG, they talk about target 2.5. It talk about touch on the needs of ensure access and fair equip sharings benefit arise among the others to end the hunger achieved through the culture. 4.7, 8.3, target 8.9.12b, definitely target 11.4, highlight the needs of strengthened effort to protect, safeguard the world culture and natural heritage. Lastly is 16.4, target SDG refer to the needs to strengthen the recovery and return the stolen assets, while 16.10 commit to ensure public access to protect fundamental freedom, which should involve recognizing the importance of the culture. Okay. Today I have a very prominent speakers, very intellectual people here to discuss about this topic. I told them, don't be too stressed. It's a lightened. We're going to have a very good discussion. And then I give it and over to Mr. Joe Sidek to run this show. Okay, please, Mr. Joe.
Assalamualaikum, selamat pagi. I think he got it so wrong. Three of us this is designer, artist, and a gardener. That's it. And the other three are academics. Good morning. I don't know, the session has a little changed. We're going to invite Edin Khoo to speak first. Yeah? Edin Khoo is a writer, poet, translator, studied political science and Islamic philosophy at the University of Newcastle. If I get it wrong, just shout. Yeah? Upon time, and Asian Arts and Archaeology at the University of London. Correct? Yeah. He's the founder and director of Kala, a publishing house that specializes in foreign literature translated into Malaysian, and is also the founder and director of Pusaka, a cultural organization that works intimately with leading custodians of ritual and traditional performing arts in Malaysia and the region. Pusaka is dedicated to creating a comprehensive documentary archiving all traditional performing arts in Malaysia while strengthening the viability of these traditions at the community level. There are workshops, festivals, and showcases all over Malaysia, and I can vouch for that. I'm a big fan. Has certainly brought new interest and fans to the traditional art forms of Malaysia. Edin? Oh, it makes it easy. I can sit there and throw questions at you all.
Good morning, and thank you, Dr. Azmi, and all for the invitation. I think I'm supposed to do a roundup of the preliminary conversation that we had about a month ago, and to kind of surmise some of the salient issues that came out during that time. It's inevitable, of course, that a lot of the conversation centered on the effects of the pandemic upon cultural life in Malaysia, and its effect on its workers. But I think a lot of the conversation also kind of elevated the realities to talk about things that are a little more philosophical maybe, and also the place of culture really in our lives as it gets increasingly critical. I am very inclined to share the view that COVID, or this pandemic, has been aptly given the title, the Great Leveler, in the sense that it has brought us all to a point of such fundamental existence that we question essentially what is relevant and what is most important for us as human beings, and they raise very existential questions. No doubt there are the very critical questions of issues of public health, of very basic societal structures that have come under assault through the pandemic. But there is also the metaphysical dimension of essentially asking the most basic question of what is life and what is the point of living. Since we are having this conversation as part of this whole discussion on sustainability and sustainability goals as propounded by the United Nations, let us center first maybe on the criticisms that were directed at the United Nations sustainability goals. And the first one was that it essentially, I think the first and critical one that I shall talk about was that it increasingly reduced the human being to the state of being a Neanderthal, that it had no existence beyond pure necessity, yeah? That it did not take into account aspects of the humanity upon which we evolve our sense of civilization, perhaps, though I hate that word, but that sense of us being civilized. And we talked about that a great deal at our session, essentially about what culture and the arts means to us as a society here in Malaysia. It also gives us a chance as we go through, and no doubt there is going to be a process of culling. There is inevitably going to be a process of culling in our cultural life, as not anyone can survive and come out of this intact. It does bring us to a bit of a Darwinian situation whereby anything that smacks of any kind of mediocrity will see itself lifeless very, very soon. Some may add deservingly so, but it does bring us to that very quintessential struggle. But a lot of our conversation, of course, and I hope the conversation then today will take it steps further, were essentially very practical questions about sustainability of our cultural life, not just amid the pandemic, but beyond the pandemic, the other side of the pandemic. How do things really change? What do we essentially harness and what do we enhance post the pandemic? And a lot of the conversations dwelled then or focused on issues of education, how to have a lucid cultural education, whether we actually even do have one. There were conversations, of course, about infrastructure, which was very important, about how we are able to sustain cultural life, the role of our institutions, and I think one of the very important questions also for urban living and so on was the question of urban regeneration, which has not been talked about or expanded very much in our conversations on this issue. How do we use spaces that already exist, for example, and imbue them with the spirit of cultural life? Do dead buildings remain dead buildings? Does Kampung Baru really have to be raised and built again rather than renewed and given new kind of life? I think these are some of the critical questions that came out in that conversation, and I think they're going to be expanded here today. I only have 5 minutes, I think, and I've crossed that line, so so I will just leave it so that we can open the discussion and take these conversations further. So issues of sustainability, issues of infrastructure, issues of education, really also of the quality of our cultural life here. And I think one big question that remains is really whether we can actually define our culture and locate its role in our life as a nation and as a citizenry. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed, and that's why we need an academic in the panel. I think Darwin said something like, it's not the strong that survives, but it's those that's best at adaptation that will come out true. So welcome to the second roundtable, Culture and Creative Cities, Art and Culture, as the fourth pillar of sustainability. I never knew what Sustainable Development Goals meant, really. I'm a gardener, and if you go out there, most of you are academics, most of you are in the professional trade. Who is it for? Who are these goals for? Are you working for your people or governments or agencies? Under whose hands is the development of the city? So thank God, what is really missing in this panel, which I really hope, Encik Mizan, that we have members of the government who makes policy changes. They should be in the room. They're the ones who should be listening or exchanging in dialogues for us then to move forward. There's no point for us to just talk about it again and again after 6 years of talking about sustainable goals, and we've not achieved anything. No report cards. And there's always this public sentiment of attacking governments. I believe this is a marvelous platform. I'm here because of architect Mustafa, because big fan of his. He's invited me 3-4 times, and I've always felt that this is a really good platform to start to engage with the different agencies. But missing are always the government that sit down to listen and engage in dialogues. So we have amazing panel that will say a lot of good things, giving advice and share their stories. But if the government's not listening to us, it ends up in a piece of paper or a report. I believe Pemandu did some years ago also. But I'm not here to diss the government. I'm a big fan of Malaysia. I love the government, and I think that it's always the case where people say, oh, where's the money, where's the grants, where's this, where's that, what's the government doing for us? But I think the only 2 countries that I know that has a really good cultural minister is Germany and England. Edin, correct me if I'm, Germany and France, correct me if I'm wrong. They're the ones with the best policies, and they set up this policy so when governments change, policies can still be implemented. I think that's something that we in Malaysia need to look into. We can change governments if we do change, but if we don't have structure policies put in place, then where do we look for the goalposts? I don't believe in finger pointing. Okay, you found out this is our direction and goals. I kind of believe this thing about being an armada of ships, of sampan and ships, that the government plays the most important piece of jigsaw, and then there's agencies like Pusaka or National Gallery, or me as an individual or the public, play our role in nation building, right? This thing has to be done as a collective, not it's the government's role to change. I think we all play a part in this, and I would really like to take, now is a good moment for change. Like, let's not wait for which government, what agencies. I really like what Urbanice has done, Encik Mizan. I actually look forward to Urbanice being the neutral role of, is that the musical background? Being the neutral role of getting the right players together to speak openly and nicely about moving forward, not being confrontational. It's like pieces of jigsaw. We're all a piece of jigsaw, and we make a really great picture. I really believe in Malaysia, and I was just sharing with the rest of the panels. I come from an arts and culture background, and I think 3 or 4 of us are very strong advocates for it. You know, Kuala Lumpur I'm going to read something here. You must excuse me, because I hate public speaking. I don't know why I said yes to this. Kuala Lumpur has great potential to develop its own high-value cultural and creative economy, which can potentially become a major contributor towards Malaysia's GDP. It will also spearhead business opportunities which can take advantage of the rapid advancements of the 2016 Kuala Lumpur cultural and creative industry the words are all over the place, contributed 11.2 billion to the country. So Kuala Lumpur. So if you look back in the last 20, 30 years, where is Kuala Lumpur now? From a cultural and arts and culture perspective, I feel where we have the best credentials to take on the world. I was sharing something that I've been working on with some of the panelists, that Malaysia has been the gateway to culture, gateway to the world for 2,000 years, right? From Bujang Valley, Malacca, Johor, Penang. For 2,000 years, we've been trading gateway to East and West. We were selling elephants to India. And so, culturally, we can also be one of the best trading platforms. So here we have a group of us struggling with the really academic questions that Encik Mizam, you have prepared for us. I was struggling with it last night. No amount of Xanax could have helped me this morning. But so I told the panelists, I called Edin last night. I said, Edin, I'm going to just follow the questions and throw you all in the hot seats. And they're all going to have to struggle with this. Yeah? But we have to start somewhere, right? As members of the community, as agencies, part of the government. Is there anybody from the government here? So that I don't get thrown out of the country? Thank you. No, City Hall plays the difficulties about Kuala Lumpur in reference to Penang, where I come from. Penang is small, it's easy. There's the state, there's the council, and there's GTWHI, and the will of the people. So only 4 components. Whereas Kuala Lumpur as a city has many layers of politics, government, big boys, developers, public agencies, and geographically too widespread. And I think what Think City tried to do, and I think DBKL too, was to find a small area in the city center to start as a template. And I think that would be a great way forward to use as an example. Okay, now I'm going to list the panelists so that it's easy for me to stop talking, because you're here to hear them talk. We have here Yang Bahagia Datuk Tom Abang Saufi, who's chairman of the National Visual Arts Development Board. Datuk Tom is a leading luminary in the world of fashion in Malaysia and proudly shown Malaysian batik all over the world. Her passion for the arts, and that I will vouch for, and fashion, and young people, has made her a much sought-after mentor, both here and especially East Malaysia, Sarawak, where she comes from. Her new role as chairman of the National Visual Arts Development Board, which will be very difficult because you inherited the entire legacy of how many years of it, is seen as timely and possibly bringing new, exciting new changes to the arts landscape of Malaysia. And then we have Yang Bahagia Professor Dr. Haji Ruslan Abdul Rahim, Dean Faculty of Art and Design, University of Technology Mara, UITM, Visual Communication and New Media, Professional Technologist. I need to ask him what that means. And then also he did his PhD in the University of Brighton for Web Interface Design, at Pratt Institute, New York City, Communication and Design. Our next panelist is Lim Weiling, who is President of Heritage of Malaysia Trust, Badan Warisan. Weiling graduated from the School of Visual Arts, Charles Sturt University in New South Wales, Australia, with BA in Jewelry and Civil Smithing. And I think she delved in arts at one point, somewhere I was reading. But what I have to say here, she's renowned galleries from Kuala Lumpur, and this is the important part. Last year, she rallied supporters and funders to put together the nation's first pavilion for the 58th Venice Art Biennale in 2019. It's not an easy feat for someone who wants to do that as an individual. Appropriately team, may you live in interesting times. I don't think she understood that the COVID was going to come. So now being in charge of Badan Warisan Malaysia, all eyes are on her to take lead as head of the one most important piece of jigsaw of heritage conservation and activities in Malaysia. Next, last, we have architect Tuan Mustafa Kamal Zulkarnain, who is the very reason why I'm here. Principal of Kamal architect Mustafa Kamal bin Zulkarnain was born in Kuala Lumpur, 1964, received his early education at Victoria Institution, Kuala Lumpur. He graduated with Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Auckland, New Zealand, while as a student worked at Auckland City Council, so good background there, and the Ministry of Environment. Upon returning home, he worked briefly in Kota Kinabalu before joining KLAF Architects. In 1994, he became a partner of the firm. He has considerable experience in education and medical and other areas of buildings, including regional and town planning and project management. I studied town planning in Manchester. That's a great discipline, but I've never used it. He is passionate about Kuala Lumpur in our conversations that we've had, and nation building. And for me, has been a great connector of people from various disciplines. So this is a group of panelists, and then the hot seat questions. Are you ready? Okay, I was given this list of questions, but as you all know, most of us are artists and cultural practitioners. We're going to switch and speak from the heart. First question, why must culture be at the heart of sustainable development? Maybe I should ask Encik Mizam that, because he gave us the question. So can I start with Edin? Edin, why must culture be at the heart of sustainable development?
That's a difficult one. Difficult
Okay, let's
question.
make it easy. I've seen what Pusaka's done in the last 4 or 5 years of using culture in the inner cities and taking culture out of Johor and Kelantan. You see, culture has been sustainable. These traditional art forms have survived the longest time. So what would it take? Maybe support, or what you do is actually making it sustainable and reaching to a new audience. So how else can governments or agencies help you to make it sustainable?
Yeah, no, sustainable development, I think we need to understand what that term is.
Please do, yeah.
It has a large dimension of it is economic. And one of the things that we have not worked out a great deal in terms of culture here is that horrible question called what is its economic value. It's a major question, and unfortunately, even when we try and grapple with that question, we do it in a very myopic way. We believe that art must pay for itself. That's an absolute nonsense. That has never been the case anywhere, right? But what art does and what cultural life does essentially is create all the necessary ripples around a particular society that give it its kind of returns. Yeah. If we look at cultural life in Malaysia or in most tropical climates, cultural life is very, very much bound to the economic life, the social life of its society. Many of the traditions we call art essentially are ritual and therapeutic traditions. They are traditions that bring healing to a community. They are traditions in which a community finds itself yearning for certain kinds of expressions. Yeah, these things have not been worked out. The problem, of course, with our understanding of tradition is that we have had a huge chasm in understanding tradition as a lived experience and taking on tradition as part of a whole policy basis, such as the National Cultural Congress, nation-building exercise, and so on. So we elevate culture to that level without actually understanding what its role and operation is within its specific society. So we find that in many state-sanctioned traditional arts or performances, for example, it is completely dead and boring and nobody wants to see it. Yeah? Whereas if you go deep into the life of these traditions in villages, in kampongs, it is very vibrant and it has a real hold over its communities. So the first thing we have to do when we address this issue is to regulate bureaucratic interference into the cultural life of our communities. Bureaucracy and institutions, of course, support players. They serve as an armature, basically a support system for cultural life to maintain autonomy. Yeah, not to have bureaucratic interference to regulate its autonomy. The other thing that I want to talk about is that our thinking about cultural life and sustainable development is very, very primitive and backward. Yeah, we have not seen how, and Dato may know, batik, for example, is a very good example, essentially of how you begin to make social investment in communities. There is a transference of skills. There is economic rationalization that happens in the process of, say, textile making, batik making, or even puppet making, or kuda kepang making. It has an economic dimension. So what you create within a particular society with a sense of skills, a sense of craft, a sense of then opening up an economy, essentially, that has the rationale of cultural life, but also has a rationale of economic life to make these things sustainable. There are many places in Sarawak that are very interesting. Barrio, for example, has one of the finest rice growing terrains in the world. It has one of the most amazing pink salt in the world that has been brought to the world's attention, but not to ours. Very, very ironic. And that forges part of the entire cultural life of the community and its economic life and its social life. Because I'll just end here, but when we think of culture, we have a very patronizing and precious approach to it. Yeah? Culture is all encapsulating. There's not one aspect of life that is neglected in culture, right? And until we begin to have this kind of approach and understanding, we will not be able to deconstruct the role, the place, and the viability of culture in our life as a community.
Thank you. Before I ask Datuk Tom to answer the same question, Encik Mizam, I think one of the reasons, I think we had this in the previous discussion, one of the points that was brought up was that we've never had our own minister. We've always been parked under youth, sports and tourism, but never even associated with education. Maybe that's a starting point for the country, for us to be understanding what culture, how important culture is, and to teach the young, maybe at an early stage. That would be the starting point for the country. Datuk Tom, would you like to pick up on that? Because I find Sarawak fascinating, and I think they work on a different level there. They've actually worked, I don't know whether they work closely with federal, but they've done their own thing, and it's quite remarkable. And their understanding of culture and creative crafts and all that, and making it work.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. You know, culture, as I grew up in Sarawak, or even now, even the whole of Malaysia, the whole DNA is culture. You don't even have to study it. It's within your whole soul. It's just a matter of taking it a little bit out, because sometimes it's been forgotten. When you live in the city, it starts to have so many like flowery words, how you describe sustainability, how you have to do things with culture. I think people who are actually very cultural deep down inside, they don't understand the meaning of it when you start to be so formal about it. You know, like for me, I am now heading a balai seni, and I don't know why I'm chosen, but Alhamdulillah, it's a huge learning curve for me. And I would like to bring the human factor into the policies. Like, for instance, we must have the soul of people who actually wants to be involved with wanting to go to the gallery, for instance. We don't want to have the converted who's going to come, or the artist, but let's find people who doesn't even know where the gallery is or what art is all about. Let's nurture them from young, you know, like, for instance, I think we do need children to be involved with loving art from a very young age. I think we do have teaching in the institutions, but I think it's not enough, because I've seen young people in certain other countries where they actually know about art, they know about Picasso, about Van Gogh. I mean, even our people here do, but you know what? The children here don't really know. I don't think they know Ibrahim Hussein or Hussein Anas. I mean, which are like huge names in the art world. even globally. But you know what? I think we need to inculcate this kind of knowledge with our young from school, you know, like to have an attachment towards art and culture, so that they can actually aspire to also be these luminaries in the art world. And also, like in my job as a fashion designer, I try to take the easiest of things to make people love culture by actually them taking interest in the motifs of batik or motifs of the songket. You know, taking, if you go to the museum, you appreciate the fabric, the textile, but I think once you start to wear them, so it's my job sometimes to actually like commercialize them. I might be criticized because like I use maybe commercial forms of getting all the motifs into wearable things, but you know what? At the end of the day, I think we have to take the museum into the street. That's the only way you can get young people to acknowledge certain part of our culture, especially in textile, in order for them to get close to the actual rare pieces by actually wearing the commercial one first, because that's when you instill interest into the museum pieces, into culture of our country. I mean, that's what I could actually like help with giving, sharing my interests with people, not to give knowledge, but it's just sharing, you know, like, and I hope that can carry me into doing some good work also with Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you, Dato'. Talking about education, so the next question. How do you see the role of architects, planners, government agencies, and educational systems, educational agencies, in playing to help people understand city centers and how culture is related to spaces? Can we have architect Mustafa Kamal? That's not in the list of questions. It's just to pick on what about education and spaces.
Wow, you put me on the spot. I was supposed to be recording whatever you say. Okay, anyway, thank you very much, Joe. Thank you very much, Urbanice, for inviting me, even though I'm just a discussant. But certainly, we need to bring back the art and culture to our lifestyle through the spaces in our cities or settlements. I think before we know about big cities, the streets was our cultural space. You know, in the morning was the morning market. Then in the close to the afternoon, you got people coming to actually, how shall I say, teach people, you know. Then towards the evening, you play games at the street. There was no courts, there was no open playground or open parks then. The only big parks maybe in Kuala Lumpur was the Lake Gardens, but in our home areas, the streets was it. And certainly towards the night, you have the wayang pacak there. So, you know, it's a daily life routine that goes from morning, you know, so you actually draw the sun angle. Now you can actually draw the cultural angle. That means to say that that's where people get to know each other, by streets, by spaces, by gardens. Dulu was the Kampung Baru, then you got this new villages, then you have got the integration between how the central city works. In Kuala Lumpur also, you have that's why you have the Jalan Melayu, you have this Jalan, all those sort of things are the places where things happen. You bring the arts to the street. I totally agree with Dato' just now, that we need to actually bring to the streets, even in pattern language. You know, Christopher Alexander, in his famous book, Pattern Language, one of the 300 patterns is to have, they call it the street factory, or the street theater, where people can see how people do ornaments, how people do anyaman, how people do karif puff, how people do Indian floral to go to the cemeteries. So these are actually the real life, and actually this is where, as what Joe was trying to say, that we've got not just a potpourri. You know, a potpourri is you mix everything, right? But this is actually the richness of us. We have everything, but we know when to take it out, so that it's actually relevant to each of the times and also each of the days of the year, or even right now, we are approaching almost to Mooncake Festival, right? So you see people playing tanglong. So, you know, where I stay, that's going to happen. You will have barbecues out on the streets sometimes at night. So I think that's my take for the moment.
Prof, do you want to take on that? I'll see you as the educational agency. And
All right, thank you very much, Joe, and also Urbanice for giving me this opportunity. I think just to recap a bit, let's pick a bit about what Aideen mentioned just now and talk about culture. I liken it to culture as an identity, actually, and we all have that. I say we as in the bigger mix. That means be it Sarawakian or, you know, for example, we're talking about I'm a product of a mixed marriage kind of thing. So all this comes into play. And taking a leaf out of what our master architect just mentioned, culture also is not just traditional, but I look at it as when you say street culture, that is also a culture. And it goes on and on and on. You have what you call the reading culture and all that. But coming back to art and what you call sustainability, earlier conversation just now while we were waiting to come in for our session, I think the general concern was that how to reach the general public, actually. Education is, of course, the formalistic structure whereby everyone goes to school and you get, you know, your lessons and things like that. But I think more so it's about engagement. And this is where you talk about institutions of higher learning, and we have what you call community engagements, whereby students are encouraged to go into volunteerism, and which is happening a lot right now. If you talk about, again, arts and the connection with sustainability, I see it also as I think it's something, when you talk about monetization, that's something tangible. You can count, you know, 1, 2, 3 million, thousands, or whatever it is. For art, when you say it's a feeling, you feel nice about it, you feel good about it on the inside, it's something that, well, physically you can't hold, but it's there. And this has to go hand in hand. Although we are cognizant of the fact that, you know, you got to have an economy, everyone's got to earn a living to live, to sustain yourself, into bring food to the table, so to speak. But at the same time, you know, your passion for art. I have a faculty of very passionate artists and designers. Until today, 2020, when you talk about, okay, thank you, you know, I love your art piece and all that, you know, let's, you know, we talk about monetization, put a value to it, how much is it? And most of the time, it's like, bagilah berapa saja. So in 2020, I think this hasn't changed, I mean, from my early years in college, but again, it reflects the passion. And it goes back to identity. You know, and of course, when you get into what you call the business model of it, and again, this is where higher education comes in. You talk about commercialization, monetizing your craft, as it were. This is where understanding that fine line, whether you, as some of the designers and artists say, have you sold out, or are you staying true to your craft? So again, I think this battle is an ongoing thing. I've had the good fortune to be involved with a private entity. It's called Segaris Art Center, whereby we formed it as, I mean, I say we as in the institution, as a private entity to act as a springboard for young aspiring artists. Again, it boils down to the economics of it. But at the same time, you know, the struggle for your identity, your culture, you know, where am I going with this? You know, sometimes your friends or the peers will just come in and say, oh, you're sold out, man. You know, your works cost carrying 5-figure price tags right now. So, you know, where does that put you? And this, well, I wouldn't call it dichotomy, but this sort of like mental kind of thing goes on and on. But on a positive note, when I talk about engagement, I see the effects. For example, DBKL, you know, when they came up with Rivers of Life, and then recently I saw a little news report on television where they have a group of like-minded people. They labeled themselves, I think, as Sketch Nation, and they just went around KL sketching.
Urban sketches.
Yeah. So I think that's I'm forever optimistic. I think, you know, don't give up I mean, you know, let's not be too critical of the younger generation, because the realization is there. I think what we can do, you know, as for the powers that be, is to engage and take it up to the next level. I think, you know, and I see this forum as maybe a start for that. Hopefully, maybe a resolution that can be carried through. And I think my 5 minutes is up.
No, you can go on. No, I'll pick what you've just said about powers to be. I'm Muslim, but I'm going to say something like, forgive him, Lord, for they do not know. Because I think quite a lot of our people up there, it's not in their business to understand culture. They've been elected ministers, they've been elected cultural ministers. That's all over the world, not just KL. Penang has the same problem all over the world. And it's always about money. I'll give an example. I did a festival, 4.5 billion budget. Our PR media value was 118 million. We spent 6 billion back into the local economy. I still lost my job. Why? Because people want populace. A good example, Pusaka's event with 4,000 people, really enjoying, understanding, and learning, compared to a Jom Hebo, which I think it's fun, but what does it do for our community? Is that the direction we want to go? 4,000 people here, 4,000 people there. What is the value of in an individual event? So money should be spent well. So Weiling, I'm going to go to you because you also have a body, right? That, from what I understand, the programming goes from the preached to the non-preached, young and old, and you're making people understanding and valuing architectural building, history, heritage, quite similar to what Edin is doing with the soft one, you're doing with the hard part, which is a very important thing because we're talking about KL, we're talking about understanding how to appreciate what we have. And like in Penang, one of the biggest losses that we've had is the people don't understand that is your best asset. No one can replicate your history or your buildings. They can build theme parks, they can build Legoland and all that, but they cannot build another building or recreate history. So I think historical elements is very important. Do you want to pick up on that, how that could help and people understand the need?
Thank you very much, Urbanice, for having me, and thank you, Joe. And a great honor to be with all of you fellow panelists. Okay, so I think, what's really important, I think fundamentally, when you think about buildings or built heritage, why are buildings built? Buildings are built for the people, right? So if you take that basic concept and you expand on it, that is when you look at an old building like a building like this, well, not this particular one, but the center, you wonder why was it built, or why was the train station built, and what, you look at you try to understand what society was like at the time. Okay, so if we do away with things that we're brought up with, the buildings that our ancestors grew up in or that define our history, really what have we got left? I mean, from a tourist point of view, from Malaysia or for any country, if you visit a country, the places that you want to go to is try to understand how this country has evolved into what it is today. Like Malaysia, when people come to Malaysia, you go to the buildings, you go to the heritage, you go to the religious sites, you ask questions about how the community has developed into where it is today. How are we where we are today? And look, let's face it, I mean, today we're talking about the heritage buildings from yesteryears, but in the years going forward, the skyscrapers and the tall buildings that are coming up today, that's going to be the heritage of our future generation, similarly, right? So, the important thing is I think a lot of the topics we discussed today about engaging the young. The young people are our future. They really are. And if you look at social media, Instagram, Facebook, all these channels, we have to. I mean, even Badan Warisan is a 37-year-old body, and I've only come into it in December of last year, and then we've had the whole washout of 2020. But, basically what we have realized is if we want to preserve the heritage and our buildings, we need to engage the young. So I was talking to a journalist the other day, and she said to me, so, Weiling, how are you going to make heritage sexy? I said, oh, okay, that's a good question. And I mean, it is. I mean, it's very valid, because when people think about history, they think about culture, they think, oh boring, next, swipe right, is it? You don't want it. So one of the campaigns that we just started on a very, very, very basic level at Badan Warisan this year was Love My Heritage. So we just sort of said, look, why don't we engage the young? How do we engage them? Engage them through social media. Go through your photo albums with your grandparents, your parents, anything to do with your history. Identify a photograph that's related to yourself, because at the end of the day, your story is important to us. Every single person's story is important. Every single person's story is a part of our heritage and it is a part of our culture. So, okay, maybe it may not be directly linked to build heritage as such, but if it's a story that you can share, then you link the young people to something related to their past. And if you link something related to the past, then that sort of eventually will lead people to questioning where they've come from, where the houses that they grew up in, the schools. I think it's a ripple effect from that. And anyway, these are just some of the ways, but I do think it's very, very important that the young are exposed to anything related to our culture, from art, history. And you know what? I think the storytelling aspect of anything we're involved as humans is always engaging and always interesting, because they're related to everyone can relate to a story, and if we can reach out in some way, whether it's to build heritage or through art or fashion or anything, that I think that's part of the battle won.
Edin, you wanted to say something?
Sorry, I think we are moving on to the next question. So before that, I wanted to pick up on a few things. One was what Dada said about we need to bring the museum to the street. And essentially, our experience as a tropical climate, as a tropical experience, our museum has always been on the street. And part of our problem is now trying to insulate the street into these little pockets of museums. That betrays one very critical problem that we have in our approach to cultural life. We are highly colonized, and our models and our desire or aspiration is an aspiration towards winter. It's to create a culture that is dominated by winter, which we don't even have here. That's not even worked out yet. Secondly, to pick up on Prof's thing, even the question of monetization is not been rationalized here. So we have agencies that apparently dwell on things like the cultural economy, the creative economy, and they know nothing about what these concepts are. So they cannot work it out for us because the idea of generating creative economy is essentially to create activities here and there and try to draw people in. That's not what it is. It is to rationalize how culture can be economized within our climate, within communities, within societies. It's to look at all kinds of different places here, go in there and make the interactions happen. Kelantan, for example, is a perfect place in which tradition, culture, skills, craft, ecotourism, green tourism, all these things can be made possible. But there's no imagination, because monetization here means hard cash. That's about it. So we are extremely primitive in terms of our planners. Yeah. So when I look at our creative economy, cultural economy vocabulary, it is completely laughable. Okay. And the other problem is my great quarrel with Mahatherism. I have no great quarrel with Dr. Mahathir. I'm a very, I think as a journalist and a Prime Minister, we get on working very well. But, we are still following the trend of 22 years ago of emphasis on the hard economy with no complementary soft economy that is being thought about, yeah? Not every 18-year-old wants to work in a factory. We have to give them different skills. These are things that are also not negotiated. The third question is this. It's a power question. And I'll say this quite candidly. I think we have a great deal of Philistine thinking in places of power. Yeah, Philistine thinking. Not all of our ministers, but a very large number of them essentially have a kind of element of cultural Philistinism, So when they make decisions that affect the whole ecology of particular societies, for example, culture doesn't even enter their minds. And if they do grant us an hour or so of their very precious time outside of calling each other Babi and Baboon and whatever not in Parliament, then it's a very patronizing approach. They're not wanting to listen. They look at it, oh, culture, yes, it's a very nice idea and whatever not, but it's not happening. I hope some of our ministers are a lot more evolved than that. But the problem also is in things like local councils. It is really a power question. So, for example, if Kuala Lumpur was more autonomized on a local level, with people who have a great deal more to urban planning and things like that to contribute, because they have the knowledge, they have the skills, they have the expertise, I think we could see a Kuala Lumpur that is a lot more vibrant, yeah? I have no pretensions or aspirations for public office, but I hope one day we have mayoral elections. That's a position I would love to stand for, because I think Kuala Lumpur has so much potential and is simply lagging behind because of a great deal of lack of imagination at the implementation level.
I certainly would vote for you, Edin. I'm going to touch you on the Mahathirism. There's one side of Mahathir that I do like. He was the only minister that's ever pushed this word Asianism, right? For the longest time, all over. I run the festivals too. We've always put a Western psyche for benchmarking festivals. So until I started reading about Asia Topa in Melbourne and AusAsia in Australia that programs Asian programming, every other major festivals in Asia program Western work. It's a shame. We have cultural history 3,000 years old, and yet we push a Western idea of culture. So there's little bits of niceness of Made, and other areas, no, maybe not so. Like you said, Edin, you run for mayor because Kuala Lumpur has got everything. It's got all the ingredients, it's got stunning possibilities. All you need is a savior or a captain or somebody who understands. I was very lucky when I was in Penang because I had a chief minister who says openly that he knows nothing about the arts, but he will stand aside and allow me to do things. And I said, simple, if I don't do my job, sack me. So for 9 years, I managed to run a festival with very little censorship, which I think is another major issue about how are we going to grow with culture and identity. This thing about museums too, no? This is still a Western psyche of going indoors for culture. When we come from a society that culture is everywhere. We eat, live, we were born with it, you know? So that's why I love what Edin is doing, because I think it's time that we look at our own culture. Who are we? Why do we put the Western psyche of culture above us, right? Okay, that's me. Next question. Where do we start? What do we do? Right? How do we connect government, privates? Here we have some really, really game-changing people who want genuinely, secara ikhlas, not to attack government, wants to stand for mayor. I want to be your assistant mayor because we want to, secara ikhlas, change. And it can be done. It's not impossible. And it's not about, oh, finger pointing of you are wrong and you're right or whatever. We have spent so much money on tourism, JKKN, Istana Budaya, National Art Gallery, and if we had a report card, where are we today? If we seriously have a report card, where are we today with art and culture? I'm doing a 2-day workshop with JKKN tomorrow, and I'm going to go through how we change. I'm not talking about the past. Let's move forward. So I'd like to hear from every one of you. Where do we start? How do we start Kuala Lumpur? Let's talk about Kuala Lumpur. How do you start with Kuala Lumpur? Maybe engaging which government agencies? Because it's so, the labyrinth of layers. I don't know whether it's DBKL that's the power lord, or is it a minister that makes the decision, or is it agencies or developers? Who controls what happens to KL? I budak Penang, Kampung, so I don't know. Help me. How do we start and where do we start? The architect, the physical structures. Where do we start? Are we at the mercy of developers in spaces? we want to change. We want to build a creative city. How and where do we start? From a personal point of view.
Right. I think we need to be very truthful to ourselves. And in order for us to be truthful to ourselves, we need to know what we have. And I think the panelists have already said what we have. So in SDGs 1 to 17, we always talk about those numbers, right? You talk about, but I think we left out SDG 17 because in this world now, you are not all alone. You have to learn, you have to understand, you have to make it happen, to be in partnership with others to arrive at the goal. So you need to actually master the art of that SDG 17, partnerships in order to achieve the goal. So what's our goal? So we need to define the goal first, right? So a few years ago, we did with Kuala Lumpur City Hall, there's a cool design. It happened for about almost 6 years. And in one of those years, we assembled 17 of the creative people with also people from the financials. Because as Edin said, without monetizing, you cannot even appreciate. So I think we need to now to ensure that there is this public, private, and people partnership, and we need to learn that skill. And I remember those years when Kuala Lumpur City Hall was actually run by a walking mayor who goes down to each of the streets, go and have 3 pens in his pocket, a green pen, a red pen, and a blue pen. So that is probably how it would run, because some years in the world does that. But we are talking about Malaysia Urban Forum, so I think we need to have a very inspiring personality to be at the office. That's what Edin, probably you can run that. And we will be behind to actually assist, because it's true. It's true, KL grew because of its genius loci. So we need to understand the genius loci of each of the cities in Malaysia. Penang is different, Johor Bahru is different, Kuala Lumpur is different, Ipoh is different, Kuala Terengganu is different, Kota Baru is different. But if we merge it all together, it becomes a bigger storyline that ever can be happening in the world of Malaysia. Even to Kota Kinabalu and Sabah, or Sarawak, Kuching for that matter. Because part of being a resilient city, you cannot avoid the word culture and arts. That is your soul, that's your life, that's your, as what Prof said, identity. So I think that will be my suggestion, because I look as an architect or urban planner as the synthesizer of all these people. We need to actually learn that skill to do SDG 17. Thank you.
Yeah, before I go to Weiling, yeah, you mentioned public-private people. I think the government has to play a strong role, standing at the back, backing people who know their work, just backing without interfering. Weiling, what do you think we should do to start changes, to make this city a vibrant city, to move the ladder up in a creative city? I think I hear that Sarawak is pushing for creative city of gastronomy and crafts. So we'll start with Weiling. Individually, tell me what you think we should be doing.
Well, I think, you know, going back to what architects have said about, you know, tying together or bringing together the corporate world and maybe the government and the public and private sectors. Now, we could, if that is, I mean, if there is success in being able to harness that, in sort of saying, for example, okay, as Badan Warisan, there are so many buildings, heritage buildings, a lot of old heritage buildings around the country, not just in Kuala Lumpur, that require funds to be restored, you know, and so that if they're restored, they can then be used as spaces that can bring in, you know, economy, right? But if there's no one going, if there's no government agencies interested in supporting that, and there's no private interest in supporting that. Those buildings just fall to the wayside, or they end up getting sold by the owners, and they're demolished, and that's the end of that. You know, that's our history just gone. So I think if there's a way that program, or a way that, for example, I think if private companies are sort of given, say, tax incentives to say, look, if you support the restoration of this particular building, or if you commissioned a public sculpture to be placed in a park or in a place that the community has access to, and then you get a tax rebate on that. That would maybe encourage more corporations to put money into helping to sustain or develop our culture and to retain our heritage. I think these are maybe just ideas. I mean, I have mentioned in the past to various people, but I think it's something that should and could be pushed forward, just as a means to sort of to make the city more vibrant. You know, bring art to the people, have people sort of more engaged with spaces. They may not even be aware of it consciously, but by being in those buildings or being in those spaces or being exposed to art and culture around them, even from a young age, it is a very subconscious sort of engagement. And I think that carries through for the next generation.
Thank you, Weiling. Just before Dato pass to you, the tax incentive thing is really, really important. The reason how Singapore has grown is they have a 250% tax incentive compared to us. So for private companies that want to raise funds, it is so much easier. So say a company like Wild Rice, whatever, they have huge, huge patrons. It encourages patronage of the arts, which we don't have here. So the likes of us have to go begging. So something about cultural policies needs to be looked into. When we get the mayor, maybe we go to the mayor to help us. Dato' Tom, maybe talk about the same subject, but maybe from a Sarawak perspective, because I think Sarawak has done a lot of good work. Even the government agencies, how they educate their own government agencies, no? And how they develop even ikat and puah and songket and all that, you know? Yeah, keringkam, yeah.
Yeah, we have lots of initiative in Sarawak. Still, there's sometimes too many bodies that you don't know which one is really doing one work and thing. You know, you have to join the resources. At least we can account for what is actually we're doing, and then we can see results, you know? Like, I think, what was the question actually when architect stuff?
So what do we do? How do we help the government connect the dots so that we move towards the right?
And also with corporations and stuff. Yeah, I think we can do little things to create awareness and to create daripada children into, you know, like for instance, if we start with 10-year-olds now, in 2030, you're going to have a 20-year-old who's going to love culture and art. And you can start with, you know, in KL, like for instance, I think sometimes people forget the urban dwellers who are from a less affluent background. We can always create fun things in these areas. You know, we can have art jamming. You know, people will just have to give paints. You know, that we can go out and make them enjoy it. I mean, that's when you start to plant the seed of loving art as fun. You know, I mean, we can do all that, you know. I mean, like, Balasini is very close to Kramat, where you have urban dwellers right in the center where there actually are vendors who only sell goreng pisang, you know, and all that, you know, like, and they have got kids. They have nowhere to go. Yeah. So we can actually start to do little things like that, you know, Kampung Baru and all that. And, you know, like, you were talking about Sarawak. I was just looking at, they used to have the tambang, you know, that cross the river, where you pay 50 cents to cross the river. Now we have bridges, now we have things, and they have no more income. You know, so I have suggested, like, maybe we paint all the boats, and a corporate person who's a paint company or something, they can provide the paint, and we do all the work on all the boats that ply the river. So it's like a moving gallery of artwork. So the artists that has not been working during pandemic, they can actually do it. And then, we can start using those boats as little shops that sell traditional cakes, like gulapung, sweets and stuff like that. I mean, all this can be done on a small basis.
Small collectives to become a bigger movement.
And it become a bigger thing. And artists can also commercialize the work in different forms, not the usual one that they usually do.
Yeah.
I mean, some people just don't have walls to put paintings in their homes. So you can start to do commercial thing, like I was suggesting they can do mobiles, they can do, screens. You do murals and screens where you can move around the house to like protect your door or whatever, like things like that.
Thank you, Dato'. I mean, I think good examples, so really, really good examples would be where we should go for. Prof, do you have anything to say on that?
Okay, thank you very much. I'd just like to take off a bit from what Dato' was mentioning just now about engagement and at a very young age. I think that's an investment, as it were. I think that's one of the key words that I'm looking at. But also, one of the things that I've come across, statements I've come across when I've attended a few social functions involving art, for example, a launch of a show, art shows and all that. And it got me thinking, and I don't know whether everyone can see that, but there has been this statement floating around that say, like, art is like, even in art, there is what is known as high art and low art. That's one thing. And the other one is that I get friends or colleagues, or literally we say men on the street, they say, well, art is for elitists. And could this be a barrier? Or could this be, I'm just throwing the question here because you do get that, and it's like, again, taking back on what Dato' mentioned just now, but not everyone has the luxury of, just to share with you, when the pandemic kicked in, higher institutions all went into ODL, open distance learning. And one of the revelations we found out was that a household of 7, a family of 7, the father needs to get access online, the mother needs to get access online, the 5 brothers and sisters need to get online, and they have only 1 laptop and no Unify.
Yeah.
And this has got us really, really thinking. And again, whereby, I'm trying to relate this to even about the education or the education of art at the end of the day. The reach, I think, is important. And it has to be at all levels. I wouldn't say, that there shouldn't be this, what you call well, the social divide is always there. But how do we build bridges on that, literally, On a positive note, I think rejuvenation of buildings, which is also an identity of any town. Yeah, I see one example. During my younger days, schooling days, or did I go to school? Rex KL. What has it become today? At one time it was like every VI student's haunt after school or during school. But again, it's become like a watering hole or a central meeting point for the arts and culture to come together. And again, this, I think, although some people say it reeks of gentrification, but there's no two ways about it. You need to do something. And I think that's one, identifiable. One of the sad stories for me is that when I passed by some of my friends, artists who staying in Ara Damansara, is that the Subang airport is nowhere to be seen at all. And for me, growing up in the 60s, that was an icon, an identity of PJ in Kuala Lumpur. So again, identity and again culture. So these are sort of like the things that are playing around in my mind. I think this. So coming back to your question, where do we go? I think engagement, investment in the young is important. The next generation here, they need the voice. Okay, 59-year-old, outgoing. So all we can do is just guide them or give them the opportunity. But the voice is with the next generation.
Edin?
Yeah, that's a very important question to ask. The PPP is very important, public-private. When we talk about Philistine culture, I think the privates are also really appalling with this because, our entire approach is, again, very primitive and backward. we are still motivated by a charity mentality. We have not evolved into a form of thinking that involves cultural investment, social investment, investment in education. And we are always very much in an either-or situation, either this or that, either this or that. It's not that way. I am worried about gentrification because I think the life of the street has a life of its own, and it must be respected. And very often the tentacles of politics and authority creep into things, you see, so that on a platform of, say, kind of morality, politics, and so on, you start interfering into the life of the cities, and this must be put a stop to, actually. This collusion between the public and the private is a matter of great concern, but it can be held to greater accountability by the people. So really, please, tuntut mayoral elections for Kuala Lumpur. And I'm absolutely serious about it.
Go the Penang way. They're going to try to push that.
Yeah, it was suggested by the last government. You look at, for example, foundations of business foundations. What do they actually do? I was on the Transformasi Nasional advisory body in 2016, so-called advisory body. Essentially, we had a bunch of consultants there telling us what we should say. So I duly resigned. But, all these things, corporate social responsibility, all these big taglines that actually mean nothing. The DBKL itself has a foundation of its own. That alone can begin to invest and bring so much life to Kuala Lumpur. Instead, it's, ambil bunga lah dekat bank, I think, because we hear nothing of what they do. And then tax is very interesting, because what Kuala Lumpur needs, not just tax incentives, they need tax restructuring, complete tax restructuring of the city, actually. Because a lot of people, and we know this from the last administration, a lot of people in Kuala Lumpur are not paying their tax, right? So we need to have a lot more of a really focused approach to these kinds of matters and issues. And I think there must be a lot more consultation between the people. You see, Rexcale is a very good example. Of course, it's been metamorphosed, transformed, but when Rexcale first came into being in the Rexcale that it is now, at least half of its activities were meant to be non-profit and so on, but they can't sustain it now because there is no tax incentive, there's no, right? So they have becoming increasingly a commercial space, which lots of people then can't use. Yeah, the community aspect of it then starts to die out. So essentially a whole rethink is required, and it really is a question of leadership and beginning to deconstruct all the various things that we could actually do. There are whole areas in Kuala Lumpur that are being completely ravaged. Jalan Tun Sambandan Brickfields is one of them, totally being ravaged. The entire historical and cultural life of the city is being obliterated and then replaced by all kinds of abandoned buildings in the end. Many of them are abandoned. Even places that exist there, for example, the Vivekananda Hall and so on, that used to be such an important part of Kuala Lumpur cultural life, is now just shut. No one knows what is going on there. So we have all these opportunities. I mean, temple spaces, Chinese assembly hall spaces, all these things that can be used for all kinds of creative purposes that are really lying dormant. Please don't, my home state is Kelantan, yeah? Okay, Kelantan ada. Okay. Why is Kelantan in the way that it is? It is really, really appalling. It's just failure of leadership and a serious thought process problem in the state of Kelantan. It can be so much more, and it doesn't have to confront the poverty that it confronts every day. Serious failure of leadership.
I want to touch on that. Anyone from Penang? Oh my God, you should all come and live in Penang. The wonderful thing about Penang is owned by the Penangites. No one cuts a tree, use a building, pull a building down without the Penangites telling you, no, this is our tree, our building. So that's the nice thing. They take total ownership, although it's a smaller place, And I really like your idea. Like in Penang, they're working, a group of people are now pushing for the red players are the ones who should vote for the councillors. And because this is our space, we should decide what happens to it, not political appointed government officers. I like that. I think we should champion that too. And you know, something else that works for Penang, it's because we're small and we don't have the huge performing halls, galleries that KL has or Singapore has. We've had to work on the streets. So we've had to bring arts to the streets. So a wall mural done by Ernest, if it put it in a gallery, perhaps only 10,000 people would have seen it or liked it. People don't understand the arts. So by putting it outside and working shows outside, people understand the background of the city is the canvas. I think we're a bit luckier. I think the way to do it for Kuala Lumpur is to look at an area, do a special area plan, one area at a time. And if that works, and then you can take it to another area. I do believe that Think City and DBKL has been working on a special area thing. But it'd be great if you involve people like the new mayor of Kuala Lumpur or to have a dialogue, to understand people, what is it about ground right up to government. We're here to help. We're not anti-government. We're passionate people that want to help. So engage us. Don't be afraid of us. Yeah? Okay, next question, and this is part of the thing. I'll go back to the normal question. What are the main challenges faced by arts and culture entrepreneurs in cities during the COVID? I mean, this is a really boring subject because everybody's been talking it all the time. But let's hear from our Malaysian perspective. We'll start with Weiling. From the artist perspective, I'm sure you understand because you're owner of a gallery, right? Two galleries are here, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. So how have artists coped?
Okay, I think for when we're talking about artists, Joe, you're meaning specifically visual artists to me, yeah? Now, I think actually, contrary to what everyone has been talking about how the pandemic has worked against artists, I think what we have seen actually, I mean, not saying across the board, but what we have seen is because of the pandemic and because of the lockdowns and because of the fact that people have had to stay at home, actually, the artists have been very productive and they have been focused, and the bodies of work that we're seeing coming out of the studios because of the pandemic have been phenomenal. And one of them I can say for sure is Anurendra Jagadeva, and really artists have just put their heads down and they've come up with incredible bodies of work because of the pandemic. I'm not saying sales. I think sales or the economic side of it, perhaps, yes, it might slow down a little bit because of the fact that people still need to go to a gallery to look at the artworks and so on and so forth. I mean, this whole thing about viewing rooms online, going onto the computer to look, at the end of the day, people still need to feel the work. They need to look at it when they stand in front of it. There needs to be that connection. I think that's a bit lost through online sort of sales.
Edin, would you like to say something from traditional practitioners who are actually surviving on some of these small incomes that they get?
The artist has greatly over-exaggerated themselves in the course of this entire pandemic. Many of them are have been purveyors of great mediocrity. Cultural life in Malaysia is very mediocre. Let's get that very clear. The genius is everywhere else. Outside in Kota Baru, in small towns in Batu Gajah. And I think we need to moderate this because when all the necessary agencies came together to try and find ways of sustaining these artists, the traditional artist, who is the custodian and foundation of our culture, didn't even enter into their realm of imagination. So it took people like our organization, for example, fed 3,000 people in Kelantan. For over a subsequent period of the MCO. None of our traditional artists fit into any of the categories that people like Chandana and whatever were coming up with. My Creative actually were coming up with, and whatever they came up with was really quite paltry anyway. But it's just that these people who are the communities who are the foundations of our culture don't even enter the orbit. Right? I think we really do not need big, very expensive cultural spaces and so on, that insulate themselves, they do not become part of the community, and need so much money to sustain. We can do theatre outside here, actually. In this climate, it's perfectly possible. So all these big spaces, when the more fundamental questions have not been addressed and answered, I think it's very paradoxical that we put in a lot of investment into those people who are, as I said, purveyors of mediocrity, while everybody that holds essentially the spirit of this country together don't even enter the realm of what is considered creative life.
I would like to take you up on that because I believe in the same thing. I sit on the panel of Cendana. We've been giving out grants, and I question why are we giving out grants to mediocre artists? We should give money for people who are hungry. They're not artists, they're just hungry people, money on the table. But to give money to people who think they're good, who work nothing, and I really agree with you, and it's a shame because Malaysia gave out a lot of grants. MOF, Cendana, My Creative Ventures, but I really felt as if, to whom are we giving these grants to? Are we going to sustain a mediocre industry and have this fake feeling that we are doing the right thing? We're not. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Maybe this takes another conversation.
Yeah, just one more thing to add very quickly, and I'll pass to Weiling, is this. If you talk to the artist in the metropolis here, always discover that their entire language is anecdotal. It speaks nothing of community, it speaks nothing of culture, it speaks all about I. Yeah? So that's one major problem, I think, that is very revealing of our culture. And the other thing is this, is accountability. Okay, I'm talking about the state of mind of our practicing artists. And not everyone, but just as a general rule, is this. I mean, we had a conversation at the last session when people were talking about, complaining about having to sign forms to get funds. These are public funds. Of course you have to sign forms. Sign the damn form and stop making so much fuss, okay? And make sure you also return your accounts, please, okay? Because otherwise, all artists get a very, very, very bad name. And if you begin to look at things, these kinds of very basic and fundamental acts of accountability are not there in many of our creative people who somehow think they have fallen from the skies and everything that they do is so precious, no matter how bad it is. I think that mentality really has to change. This is not present in traditional artists, I must say, whose struggle is far greater, whose encounters with censorship is far deeper, and I think their voices need to be listened to a lot more carefully because they've also come up with the strategies to subvert these kinds of things.
I think, well, both of you. Basically, I think, expanding on what you're saying about artists and their accountability and what they're trying to say is anecdotal and all that sort of thing. I think at the end of the day, the question you must ask, Joe, is who are the artists who are actually putting in their submissions for these grants? And why are you not reaching out to the real artists, the really hungry artists? And I think the fundamental question is, or reason perhaps, is because they don't see transparency. They don't know how how the selection is made, and it's all a bit murky. And so then real artists who really need the money, they'd rather go and look for the resources themselves somewhere else than to try and get a grant where they think, oh, it's already sort of predestined. Someone else is going to get it already. I'm never going to stand a chance. So you don't get the right people going in there and the deserving artists going in there and then pushing forward to achieve meritocracy and not mediocrity.
I sit on the panel. Please give Cendana a chance. It's only on the third year. We're learning the ropes. I totally agree with you. I think we need to restructure it. I threw a question to Cendana. What is the role of Cendana and JKN? Why do Ministry of Finance and My Creative Venture fund two organizations running parallel, almost supposedly doing the same job? So that's where the problem is. Who gives what? So I think we need a serious relook. This COVID thing is great. It's made all of us stop to think. rethink, rewrite, relook, rework things. And I hope government agencies take note of that too. So, before we get heated and I get thrown out of Malaysia or out of Cendana, next question from the paperwork. How have local authorities created environments that encourage arts and culture in the city for, I wouldn't say for post-COVID activities, for culture? Architect. Environments, spaces.
Well, I could. I think ever since the advent of the local plans and also structure plans, many cities has actually looked at creating places and spaces for public. So now we need to, like what some of the panelists say is, we need to be focused how arts and culture creates the nerve of the city, creates the engine of, how shall I say, flow of ideas and also sustainability in the city living. Because, you know, especially during COVID-19, when people stay at home, look at what happened to the cities. It's deserted. It's actually empty. You can actually lie on the road and experience how it felt to be in the middle of the road. So really, we need pockets of healing corridors for the cities, and KL has done a lot of pocket parks, but I think we need to actually look at how that could be interconnected so that it becomes a thoroughfare. It becomes what I call part of a journey that people can enjoy Kuala Lumpur without having to even use their private cars. So you have to have an interconnected parks. That's what we are trying to push. Even like in Penang, you can walk from space to space, just going through the buildings. So this is what happens with nice places and cities, right? When you go traveling, I think we miss the traveling overseas, right? If you go to, say, in Italy, from one campo to another campo to another campo, it's just walking. You don't have to take a car. So because you enjoy seeing the fabric, the buildings, you enjoy to see how people use the culturally, whether it's as a food or as a place of commerce. So I think the local authority need to do a lot more of this and not make a big space in one area, but it has to be smaller things in a lot of places so that it actually be interconnected. And I think that will actually enliven the cities. You know, we don't want to be labeled certain areas a certain place, a certain center a certain place. It has to be, how shall I say, very democratic, when also it has to be more people friendly.
Okay, I'm going to touch on that. Putting an example, Dato', I'll speak to you. We look at Istana Budaya, we look at National Gallery. Two white elephants, beautiful buildings standing there in an area that is very hard to get, not accessible. And when Istana Budaya was built, I think 30 over years ago, it was the state-of-the-art best in Asia. What have we brought out from Istana Budaya to show to the world, right? And then has Istana Budaya really passed a report card that they have actually indoctrinated young Malaysians to love culture, right? So I think Pusaka has brought shows all over the world. Has Istana Budaya brought any shows outside Malaysia? So as an area, I'm talking about, again, two public buildings that with the government has spent so much money. Why don't we relook at it, and what can we do? Because we can't move National Gallery. We don't want to spend, I hear Petronas is building another gallery. Did you all know that? Have anybody heard that? Yeah, a museum, yeah. So why not spend money and rework National Gallery and Istana Budaya? Can I direct that question to you first, about as an area, about physical space?
Yes, I've just joined
Somebody help her with the volume?
I've just joined Balai Seni, and then pandemic. You know, and they've already had policies. They have had like programs and agendas for the next 2 years. And then they also are now under renovation for another 1.5 years. So, and suddenly came into the office and I said, oh, what am I supposed to do? But then there are things that we can actually do, because I like to talk on the positive side of things. We can actually do things outside Balasini. We try to get involved with people who's got spaces outside. You know, like we try to engage less known artists to actually like do some creative work, which they've done during the pandemic. And we do have a bit of funds also to help them doing videos, and then we go through them and just give them a bit of funds for them to continue with the sort of work that they actually can do, because they do it with their phone, you know, like YouTube and all that. We provide them with that kind of fund.
I love your idea of programming, but what I'm trying to say is these are two physical structures that the government has spent so much money on. What can we do to bring it back as a little cultural hub that can be integrated with, you know, everywhere around the world, you go Brisbane Powerhouse, Yokohama Red Brick, they put culture and commercial and money to survive.
Yes.
So it's not about masak-masak and band-aid thing. We need structural thinking. We can't pull it down. We're not going to pull National Gallery down. We're not going to pull Istana Budaya down, but we need change. So we need to orchestrate an idea how to do it. I mean, like I said, Edin, you've brought shows all over the world. Global people know you. I've been on the circuit and nobody knows what Istana Budaya has brought out. And it's the same thing. How can we do? What can we do?
Exactly, because
bring culture back to the
I'm not
area.
an authority on the performing arts and Istana Budaya. Maybe you can actually like...
say something, Edin. I mean, like, it's a shame, you know?
Yeah. The Balai Seni Lukis Negara is very close to my heart. Istana Budaya not so much. The BSN only because, you know, we can't just see the BSN as it is today in that building. It has an entire history. Ismail Zain was, as director of the BSN, was one of the first people to get me involved in the arts. And it was a very, very organic space. And I remember when I was 17 years old, Ibrahim Hussein's retrospective was held. Later on, I did my book with him, so he's extremely close to me. But I went to that show as a 17-year-old delinquent teenager 20 times. And one time I was able to meet him. So my suggestion to Balai Seni is, whatever programming exists, cull. And start post-pandemic afresh. There are so many things that can be done. So much of the work of art of Malaysians is today thriving. I have done 3 webinars with the National Art Gallery of Singapore on Latte Mohidin. 3 webinars already. And Ibrahim Hussein's work is going there. Pia Dasa's work is going there. You know, so much can be done really to rationalize again in the Balai Seni Lukis Negara. Istana Budaya, when it first came up, I was an arts reporter. I asked one very important question. I said, you have this state of art, none of it works now apparently, it's like things are all falling all over the place, but you know, you have this state of art main stage that can accommodate 3,000 people or 5,000 people, whatever it is. Where's your smaller training space? They didn't have one, you know? So I think a lot of the problem of Malaysia now at that time was its aspirations towards a monumental culture, right? But we, particularly the Malays and Malay culture, which is foundational culture, is not a culture of ostentation and pretension. It's a culture of nuance, subtlety, sensibility, or the operative word in Malay culture is halus, refinement, refined culture. And that can happen in the smallest of spaces. And it can inspire the most brilliant things in the most confined spaces. You know, the most amazing thing to ever witness is a Mak Yong ritual performance, which is done in a tikka shed with, you know, sometimes 400 or 500 people gathered around. We need to understand. That's why history is very important. You know, we are having a lot of this conversation devoid of a sense of history.
You know, now I am involved with the Balai Seni. It's really a huge learning curve for me, and I really would like anyone who would like to contribute towards a new balai seni, please call on me, and every suggestion is welcome, because I think we have to carry this to a different level of community involvement, making it into a greater place that it was in history. Because, you know, when you hear of how it started with Mr. Harris, with the art movement and all that, we have to go back to that kind of feel and the heart of it all. Please do call on me, anyone who's involved with balai seni. I would really bring it on.
Thank you.
Board.
We'll start with electing Edin as mayor, and then he can call. No, thank you.
I'm serious about that.
No, Edin. I must say, one of my most favorite moments of 9 years running Georgetown Festival was programming a Kuda Kepang performance in a basketball court, and we had nearly 3,000 people. And until today, people are asking about it. It exposes culture to everybody who not necessarily know, understand, or want to understand, but when they see it, they're just mesmerized, and they start to try to want to know more. And then we have to work together. Okay, I'm told to go straight into question time. Oh, rather difficult questions. Okay, tongue-twisting questions. Dr. Koo Sweat Ling, are you in the house? Or is it online? Oh, online. Oh, Dr. Koo asks, the creative city model, if misunderstood and implemented wrongly, will cause urban exclusion. That's what you said, Edin, an exacerbation of urban social economic inequalities. Is the creative city strategy the way forward for Malaysian cities? Who would like to take this first?
I'm talking a bit too much.
No.
They may all be taking my mayoral ambitions.
Oh, you got my vote. You got my vote.
No, I actually am very suspicious of this entire United Nations, UNESCO kind of strategies that we play up to. Simply because we then arrange our methods of thinking according to those principles. And we do not look at our cities from its very life itself. We are not consultative. We get a matter of principles and guidelines upon which we want to fit in. You know, so my whole, and I don't understand why we are, and that's why I said, still very, very colonized. The moment you hear UNESCO, living heritage things, you know, all your blood rush goes into your brain and you all get a bit, everybody's aspiring to become UNESCO, you know, city. I mean, if it happens, fine. But let's not, you know, dictate or shape our policies, our approaches, our methodologies according to these kinds of things, because they have tremendous, all kinds of other kinds of serious effects.
No, I subscribe to that. I've been having a long conversations with Chongket. Why are we looking at the Western blue ribbon to dictate where we are placed in this creative city? You know, we really don't need that. Seriously, I agree with you. Architect, would you like to say something? Or anyone else?
Can I just...
Yes, please.
Yeah, since the mic just fell into my place. I think just to add on what Edin was talking about, the way forward, the way I look at it is that, you know, I mean, being Malaysian first, and you know, like I said, this diversity of cultures and identities, it would be, I think, much more realistic to have our own mold, maybe based on some elements that's out there in the SDG. I mean, you can't, I mean, there are certain things there which I think can and may work. Something that we got to try, but I think our own mold would sort of like give us a stronger sense of identity and sustainability in the context that it will, you know, it's the way forward, and it will continue that. I mean, we talk about, again, I'm very, very touched by what Edin mentioned about, you know, that the word halus, you know, the sensitivity. Again, we talk about appreciating the, let's say, how sensitive you are to KL. In fact, before the pandemic kicked in, we used to have on a fortnight basis a KL car-free week, and I used to participate. I used to either jog or cycle around there, and Jalan Tunggul Rahman, when you're at that pace, you are very sensitive to every bump, shops that you just pass by in a car, and you realize that, oh, I didn't know that this shop was still around, and things like that. Again, it's about identity, because there's certain things that I grew up with, and I was very surprised that the sports shop, GS Gill, is still around. You know, it used to be in the 70s, like it was the sports place to go if you want to get your pair of original Adidas. Yeah. I mean, but things like that. So again, coming back to what you talk about, subscribing to the, well, if you say heavily colonized, maybe our own mold will be the way to move forward, and certain things that we can actually pick from what we have. Again, the history is very, very important, and then move forward on that, because I think uniquely we have a lot of things here that no one else has, and I'm a true believer
No,
of that.
I really believe that, because for the 9 years that I was running Georgetown Festival, Singapore Development Board, Singapore Tourism, Singapore Heritage Board used to come to see us every year asking questions, because your formula is the best. It's your city. You should know more. Singapore, with all this money in the world, could buy the biggest acts and biggest show. You take the entire festival, put it in Taiwan, it's a Taiwanese festival. So build your own narrative. Have your own benchmark. And then we should talk about this. I really would like to start a movement of having our own benchmark, Asia on top, us first. There is a small festival in Cambodia that everybody overlooks. And you look at Melbourne, Singapore, Georgetown Festival, we all think we've got like 80,000, 90,000 eyeballs is great. The small festival run by 5 young people, a village festival called Bon Pun, has got 300,000 eyeballs. They use young people with technology, they use traditional music, they use film to sell their own culture for their own people. Culture should be for us first, not for tourists. Yeah? So anyone else want to touch that, or can I go to the next question? Next question is hot seat, also from Dr. Koo Swet Ling. She obviously is very passionate. Precisely the lack of true understanding of terminologies like culture, creativity, cultural creative industries, creative city, creative-led urban regeneration by stakeholders will render this urban redevelopment strategy slippery and problematic if misinterpreted. I think that's the same things that we were talking about. I think we'll skip this question. Sorry, Dr. Koo. I think we've just touched on that. The next one is Dr. Nur Hashimah Muhammad Nordin. Yes, correct, Architect Mustafa. We need to define our goals. What do we want to be in the world map? A multicultural country? How do we want to make it real? This is an important question. Multicultural country. I'm going to stress on that. Can we have, okay, since it was you mentioned, I would like all 5 of you to touch on that subject.
Yes, we can make it if you all, again, as I said, the SDG 17 partnerships, because everybody seems to be in silos. We know little places in certain parts of the country, we don't know much. So we need to talk to the people. We need to be down to the people. And I think places like universities, colleges, they are the inspiration and sources that can go down and work together with the practitioners to actually guide, so that we can create this new horizon, as what Edin was trying to say, acuan kita sendiri, something like that. We cannot be a homogeneous city, or else we'll be labeled, Kuala Lumpur, it's the same as Penang, it's the same as No, we have to avoid people saying that word. It has to be, hey, you better go to Johor Bahru. It's different from even Batu Pahat. So that's where we need to build that cultural difference, and that difference will make the USP and the different storyline. We have to actually learn to tell stories. And I think stories are very important, and this is where they, even in what's that thing, they got the Tukang Karut, right? This storyline that talks about the life of today, the very problems of today. So that's happened in that Boria, or even in I forgot that culture in where the group of people sing together. So we need to learn the storytelling, and that's why places like in the Western is because they know how to do storytelling. We need to do our own storytelling.
I think it's important. I think each state in Malaysia, for example, if we're talking about multiculturalism, each state has got their own distinct and distinctive cultures that emanate from each of the states. But I don't think enough people know about that, actually. I don't think this is really sort of inculcated in school. I don't think this is taught. I think even as you grow up, unless you go and find out for yourself, no one really knows where certain things have originated from. So I think it comes from school. I think if from an education perspective, if these things can be sort of inculcated into the curriculum, to the national curriculum for Malaysians, as a multicultural country, where all the cultures and all these aspects of Malaysia or Malaysianness are shared and taught, this would I think create or form a generation of Malaysians who are proud of their country, of their nation, and who understand where they come from, and as you said, know their identity, you know. So at the end of the day, it's maybe multicultural, but we are actually all just Malaysians. So I think that's very important to bring home.
I come from Borneo. I come from Sarawak. There's never been much issue about disparity of cultural differences. We embrace each other's culture. I'm the first to visit someone during Gawai or during Christmas or Chinese New Year, and the Chinese and the Iban and other races are the first to come to my house during open house Raya. And open house really is open house. There's no invitation, there's nothing until today. You can come in because you know why? That house has got very wonderful cakes. Just walk in and you eat the cakes and you say bye-bye. But you know what? But then again, I have made Kuala Lumpur my home for the last 40 over years, and I love it. And there are places that I love so much about KL, I miss it because you don't have it anymore. You know, when I first came to KL, there was like the Campbell Road where I will have the spring chicken, and there was Pines where you have the most wonderful fried rice. You know, and I long for it because now they're trying to create new things, but it's just not the same. But you know, but I think when I went to Rex, the old Rex cinema, there is a little bit of feeling about it because it's still, we could have the Laut Power and things like that. No, but it's still not the same because it still gives me feeling of another city, like what Hyper used to be in Kensington High Street before. That's what it was emulating. But I think what we can do now is actually just doing our own thing about trying to integrate culture together by, I mean, food has always been a wonderful thing for all of us to get together. Everybody loves the nasi lemak. So, you know, like, we have that, and in fashion, we can also do that kind of integration together with it's a subject matter that can be so non-controversial, and yet it is so uniting, you know?
Anything you all want to add?
I mean, just touching on the note about culture, the other thing, interesting thing, I think, is when I relate, I mean, you know, forgive me for being a bit anecdotal, but I think, I think the other culture is about the how shall I say it, the shift of from rural to urban. That's also a culture. And also right now, I think we also have from the urban to the rural. And also you have the suburbs. So these are all, I can sense, I've experienced it, I think, what you call differing cultures, emerging cultures. And this goes beyond what you call race, religion, or even region. And this is something that, I'll just throw you an example. Again, I won't refer, I'll just refer to myself. If I would tell you that, you know, back in the 70s and the 80s, I grew up in Bangsa. Everyone, majority here will go like, ooh, Bangsa boy. But back in the 70s, if you would say, if you would tell everyone that you stay in Bangsa Park, people would say like, why are you staying there? You know, it's at the end of KL, it's always flooded in front, the news rates times and all that kind of thing. So again, it's a different, so culture, I think, has this, going back to, you know, urbanization, rural, suburbs, it creates new cultures. And I know for a fact here, maybe about half of the audience here, audience of 1,000, people here actually have grown up in the urban environment, but their parents are maybe urban and a bit rural. So they have this what you call this romantic migration of going back hometown. But for a new generation or this present generation here, KL is their hometown. So the culture is here. So I think this is something that we have to also take note, and cannot, it's nice to relive and reflect, but I think we need to also reflect on what's happening right now and see where we're going to go from here.
If I may, very, very quickly, in the 15th century, or maybe even earlier, 10th century, maybe one of the kings sent his people out to survey every single village and region in England, and came up with a book called the Domesday Book. I think we in Malaysia really need to do that, because our characteristics, even in particular states, is so interesting and different. But let me grapple with the term multiculturalism. It's a term that I don't accept. This is a European term that came up in the 60s and 70s and was an attempt essentially to try and make sense of immigration. That's what it was. That's not our reality. Our reality is Malacca, where Lopez de Esquerra comes to Malacca, and he writes back to the court in Portuguese, and he says, this place is totally beautiful and mad, because at any given spot in Malacca, nothing less than 90 languages were being spoken. This is our reality. This kind of cosmopolitan worldliness. We have known no other reality in Southeast Asia. We must pay a lot more attention to the Malay language, because we need to create our own terminology. Malaysia, budaya berbagai ragam. Yeah? Budaya berbagai ragam, which contains in it a very interesting concept of somehow cultures existing, coexisting, at times in peacefulness, at times with a certain kind of tension, but that is what drives our cultural difference. Yeah. So really, let's not be so taken up by all these Western terminology again to describe their particular experience, while we are contributing nothing to the conversation on multiculturalism and plurality in the world, when that is our most basic reference. Yeah. The greatest challenge to Malaysia as a budaya berbagai ragam is puritanical politics. Yeah, the politics of Puritanism, whether it's race or religion, because they are creating fantasies about what each of our races and religions represent.
No, thank you. We have to have another discussion on that too. We have a limited time. I would like to open the questions to the floor, either one or two, if you're not too long. Anyone? If not, we'll release ourselves from the hot seat. Anyone? Anyone? Okay.
Come.
Is there a planted question?
Thank you for that. It was always really insightful to hear from this panel. I think I've heard from you guys before, and Joe, that was really great. But yeah, actually I have a question for all of you, but also since we have, is DBKL still in the room, or have they left? They've left. I was hoping to bring them in actually, just because what you were saying, Weiling, about buildings and that being kind of like a really interesting kind of way for us to connect our history, our heritage. I grew up in PJ, and just a few days ago, Paramount Cinema was demolished. And that's Paramount LRT station, right? That's what Paramount stands for. And I can't say that I mean, the community didn't appreciate that cinema. There was no fight for it. But then again, land prices and things like that, how can you fight for it? But I think what you were saying about buildings and having that kind of spaces and having tax exemptions, and I wanted to get DBKL's input on what they can do to support this kind of tax exemption. I don't know if any of you could answer that, perhaps Mustafa Kamal, in terms of what local authorities can do to help support this kind of thing. But yeah, no, just to finish up. And again, with DBKL, I wanted to bring in the idea of walkability. You know, when you walk, you, like you were saying just now, you know, you really appreciate what's around you. And I think not only is it having these cultural spaces or preserving these natural, these heritage buildings, or, but it's also that, you know, the way we move around is also really important. So So yeah, that's a little bit of question comments from me.
Okay, I mean, look, I am not really going to touch on the how DBKL can help with the tax incentives and so on and so forth, because I have no idea about that. But I think from Badan Warasan's perspective, what's really important and something that we are working on is to add to the National Register of buildings that need to be gazetted in the country. Okay, so there's already a national register with I think a group of buildings that have already been gazetted, but we need to add to that. So I think it's important for the community. I mean, so that there's ownership, like you say, there's certain buildings that you think should be, as a next generation, who should be preserved for the future. And then other people feel different things. So I think it'd be really interesting actually to put that out there, to pose the question to Malaysians, what buildings do you think should be preserved? And then take it from there. I mean, just it's purely from Baran's point of perspective.
The public really care for not only just buildings, even trees.
Oh yeah.
Even plantings. So really, the will of the people, and I think like Edin puts it really rightly, we have to speak out. We have to claim that this is our land, our space, our buildings. But let's start small. Let's start in an area where we can work. Now, I think we've run out of time, unless there's some burning question out there. If not, I'd like to thank Edin, Prof, Datuk, Weiling, and Architect Mustafa for joining me this morning, although I was so unprepared for this. So I'm really sorry if I threw like paper questions to you all. I really enjoyed this session. I really feel as if we could have a long more discussion, specific subject, Edin and Dato and all that. And I hope Urbanice, if you can, work out specific focus groups to have maybe not so public discussions, private, so that we can have public discussions. With that, Assalamualaikum, terima kasih, and enjoy your lunch. Yeah?
Okay, welcome. Sorry, miss, can I take this? Okay.